What's going on, everybody? Welcome to another Angle of Pursuit podcast, your fantasy football, sports betting, and NASCAR home over at fakepigskin.com. I am your host, Kyle Robert. Follow me on Twitter at NotoriousKRO. With me once again, it's Brian Twining. What's up, Brian?
What's going on, Kyle? And I'm sure that our listeners and our watchers can see here we're both rocking some baseball gear, as today is a joyous day for us with baseball opening. But, although we love baseball, we're not here to talk baseball. We're here to talk fantasy football because I'm getting stoked for that season to start.
Yep, 100% agree. At the same time, I'm very happy. I have a wall of TVs behind me, and with NASCAR, MLB, and some NBA preseason, I will be able to actually start taking advantage of those, which will be very nice. I assumed by now I would have had them significantly broken in and had games going consistently. But, here we are. I'm happy we made it. But, yeah, as you mentioned, we're here to talk football. We're not here to talk basketball or NASCAR. Fingers crossed we win some bets tonight on the NASCAR race. But let's talk some football. And we're going to play an age-old question: to draft or not to draft? That is the question. And while you're here, make sure you mash that thumbs up. Make sure you subscribe. And with any of these names, if you have a strong feeling about, yes, 100% going to target this guy, or I don't know,
or if you just think we're batshit crazy.
Yeah, that too, which, I mean, probably is the case. Go ahead and leave a comment. Let us know what you think. But we're going to talk some guys with some interesting ADP and kind of figure out, are we drafting them? Are we avoiding them at their ADP? What do we make of them? And let's start in Atlanta. We're going to start with Calvin Ridley, a very interesting receiver. Obviously not the wide receiver one in that offense. That's Julio's offense, and so much goes through him. And, a lot of targets opened up when Austin Hooper left town, but Hayden Hurst, the guy that you're very excited about, a guy that I'm very excited about, steps in. Todd Gurley's there to fill the running back role. They still have Brian Hill to kind of, complement in some of the pass down. But Calvin Ridley, the hype train's going. He's wide receiver 16. I'm using NFFC for this ADP. I did cross-reference my fantasy league just to kind of get some comparisons. So going about the fourth or fifth round, I can give you some names going around him, but let's just talk about him from kind of off the jump. Obviously, 13 games last year, only started 10 of those. Had 93 targets, caught 63 of them for 866 yards and 7 touchdowns. That is coming off of the previous season where he played all 16 games with 92 targets, 821 yards, 10 touchdowns. Those touchdowns are nice. If he's going to continue to rack them up, that's going to be make it a incredibly compelling case. But in the fourth or fifth round, like I guess, where do you stand with Calvin Ridley in general when it comes to like what you think he can be and his kind of draft day price?
I mean, he's a guy who I think is going based on his value. I think he's going right where he should be going. Last year, I was a little bit down on him. It was hard for me to project him to kind of piggyback his rookie year numbers into last year, which he did that, and he was on pace to exceed those numbers. And I think as a third-year guy coming in here, like you said, with the departure of Austin Hooper and Devontae Freeman, although they went and they added our boy Hayden Hurst and Todd Gurley, like, I don't see Todd Gurley taking up the amount of targets that Devontae Freeman was seeing out of the backfield. I don't necessarily see Hayden Hurst jumping into that kind of substantial role as Austin Hooper, even as much as we like him. With the limited offseason, I think you're going to see the familiarity between Ridley and Julio Jones really pay dividends for them in the fantasy world. And let's not forget that as good as Julio has been on a consistent basis, he's also 1 year older for a guy who's also had lower body injuries. I mean, you're looking at Calvin Ridley, who he's going as the 16th wide receiver right now. He was the 16th best wide receiver on a per-game basis last year. So, I mean, he's getting drafted right where his value stands, and in an offense that is likely going to be passing a lot once again under Dirk Cutter. and a defense that even with the returns of a lot of their young superstars, they're playing in a division now that has Tom Brady running the show in Tampa, still facing New Orleans. Carolina, who knows what we're going to see out of them? I think we're going to see a lot of shootouts in the NFC South, and I love Calvin Ridley, and he would be a guy that I would target if I went running back, even running backs, 3 straight running backs. That I would be more than happy to take him as my first wide receiver off the board.
Yeah, I don't know if I can get there. I get some of the points you're coming out with, and there's, like we mentioned, like there's vacated targets. They have the most of any team in the NFL this year, 258. It's almost 40% of their targets are gone. So there's obviously room for Calvin Ridley to continue to improve. Last year, the last 2 years, he's basically been like a 90 target guy. It would be good to see him clear triple digits, maybe even approach 110, which, I mean, considering, as we mentioned with Hayden Hurst and Todd Gurley and some of the other pieces coming in, obviously they'll get their share, but there's still room for growth. So I like the idea of Calvin Ridley. I like the idea of his potential upside. But, I mean, if you're looking at the receivers that are going around him, Juju Smith-Schuster, Adam Thielen, A.J. Brown, Robert Woods, all those guys are compelling cases to me, and I probably would take all of them over Calvin Ridley. Beyond that, it gets a little more interesting. Talking DK Metcalf, another second option. Obviously, the Falcons are going to throw more, so I like Ridley there. Cortland Sutton, I don't think he's going to be quite the volume monster he was a year ago with Jerry Jeudy and Noah Fant and KJ Hamler and all those guys. Which we like what the Broncos are doing. DJ Chark, Terry McLaurin. I might go McLaurin. I might go Tyler Lockett who's wide receiver 23. Like, that range is very interesting. I think you're going to have to really take some serious stands. But I like you last year. I didn't love Calvin Ridley. Prove me wrong. But I think I'm going to keep a similar mindset heading into 2020.
Just like you said with my points, like I can definitely see that vantage point as far as like with the guys that are right around his ADP of like a Juju who, he didn't have a good season, but he didn't have anybody throwing him the ball, and Adam Thielen, who is now the alpha dog and no question about that in Minnesota, and he has a great rapport with Kirk Cousins. So I mean, we should expect to see him see probably an increased target share for the Vikings, but it's just going to be the scoring for him. And, we've seen Ridley 2 consecutive years, 7+ touchdowns. And if he would have played 3 more games, who knows how many more we're going to get. Like, I'd prefer the guy in the offense that's going to be trailing more and a team that's just going to be throwing basically, 60 to 65% of the time to a Thielen who's on a team where if they get the lead, they're just going to pound the rock the entire game.
Yeah, Seattle and Minnesota are like that, but you also have the ability to target the wide receiver 1. So it's really do you want the wide receiver 1 in an offense that's going to run more, or do you want the wide receiver 2, but in an offense that's going to throw more, have more opportunities potentially? And then A.J. Brown, I think, is a guy that if you're looking for wide receiver 1 with like top 5 upside, I don't think Calvin Ridley has that. A.J. Brown does. So I don't hate like. If I get A.J. Brown in the 5th round, even if I start with a running back heavy approach, and he's my 2, like if I go 3 studs and then I get, a wide receiver like A.J. Brown, a Juju, and then you back him up with a Calvin Ridley, I like that a lot. But if he's my wide receiver 1, I don't love it. And as someone who traditionally goes wide receiver heavy from the jump anyways, this is probably where I'm going to start talking running backs, and make sure you check out our YouTube page because Brian and I after this are going to talk some options for 0 running back drafters, guys that want to wait at that position and find later options. So, but Calvin Ridley. I mean, and I think it's good that we're obviously talking it out, figuring out. I think a lot more people are probably going to come down on your side where he's a guy that they're interested in. And obviously, based on his ADP, based on the way people are kind of talking about him, I totally get it. But Julio is still going to be such a volume monster in that offense that I just have a hard time consistently going to the second option, especially as much as I like Hayden Hurst and I like Todd Gurley and his touchdown upside in that offense.
Yeah, I mean, just to stick with Calvin Ridley and go with one more point here, like I know this is not something that you try to prognosticate in fantasy sports or in like all sports in general, but I mean, Julio Jones, for as good as he's been on such a consistent basis, at some point we're going to see a season out of him where he's just riddled with nagging injuries and he starts to slow down. I mean, I don't know if that's this year, but I would rather be on the side of when Calvin Ridley like kind of reaches a similar level of usage in this offense than not be, because when that happens, his skill set is enough to be the wide receiver one.
163, 203, 129, 148, 170, 157. Those are the target totals for Julio Jones since 2014.
I know.
He gets 50 more targets. Even if that number, say, goes to 30, you're still talking 30 or 40 more targets. You're still talking a super efficient receiver. And I know people don't love his touchdown because they say he never scores them, but 6'8", 6'3", obviously in 2017, 8 and 6. Like he's a guy that's going to get you enough touchdowns where all those catches and all that yards are going to be so valuable. Like I guess my other question to you is, if you start with more of a receiver heavy approach and you look at, like, say maybe you start Julio Jones in round 2, is Calvin Ridley someone you're willing to grab at that point and have 2 Falcons receivers? Or are you pivoting off and looking at one of the other names, hoping you can get a little more upside?
I am not abashed from looking at teams that are going to be so pass heavy and a quarterback that could support 2 top flight guys. I mean, we saw with Dak last year. I would have been more than comfortable rostering both Amari Cooper and Michael Gallup. If I wind up with a stack of DK Metcalf and Tyler Lockett, you're getting 2 guys who on a weekly basis are getting you decent floors, with one of them bound to pop. Yeah. So I don't see the downside of situations like that. I would rather go that route than take a chance on a guy, like I said, with Adam Thielen in an offense who's more than likely going to be running the ball more often.
Yeah, so I like you. I'm willing to approach that, like have 2 pass catchers on offenses that I think can support 2 top 15 type options. Like I think the Rams, Cup, and Woods are like that. I think the Falcons guys, there's probably a couple more. It would really depend on price too. Like if Juju is there, if Adam Thielen is there, if Robert Woods is there, I'm taking all those guys over him. But if we're in like the Cortland Sutton, DJ Chark, Tyler Lockett, even maybe, I don't think I'm going to own Calvin Ridley this year. I look at all these names. Marquise Brown is interesting to me. Like it's when you really get to like Stephon Diggs, Tyler Boyd, Michael Gallup, Jarvis Landry. That's where I'm like, okay, give me Calvin Ridley. But that's wide receiver 28 to 30. I'm not getting Calvin Ridley. And maybe if I start, running back heavy and my league is taking receivers, which doesn't seem very likely, then maybe he becomes a guy that I need a receiver. I need that weekly safety. And maybe if I'm looking at, okay, I start with a more volatile option earlier, then he becomes more interesting, because I do think he's going to be pretty solid. Like I don't think he's just going to collapse. I don't think there's going to be a thing where the Falcons offense just doesn't throw. So like I feel good about rostering him, but I'd much rather have him as wide receiver 2. But there's just so many other guys in that range that I would rather take that I don't think I'm going to own them. Let's shift our focus. We'll have to come back to that one, because I think that will be an interesting.
This will be it's going to be a year-long debate for that.
Because I do think he's a very talented receiver. It's hard in that offense. Let's head to Cincinnati. Let's talk about AJ Green. Going in about the 6th round, around wide receiver 30. He's a guy that interests me, but I feel like AJ Green is either bouncing back to what we saw before all the injuries of 2018, 2019, and Joe Burrow is going to flourish and be awesome, and that offense is just going to take off. or it's going to be a mess, and he's either going to be injured or Joe Burrow is going to struggle as a rookie or something where he's not going to return this. So either you're getting a tremendous value or you're overpaying significantly. If you had to bank on what AJ Green was doing in 2020, are you banking on him providing serious value in the 6th round, or are you providing on him underwhelming owners who are banking on his name value and not looking at what he's done the last 2 years?
This is easily one of the most difficult ones that I've looked at because he's currently being drafted around guys. A teammate, Tyler Boyd, is going in the same area as him. Marquise Brown, T.Y. Hilton, Jarvis Landry, who's a PPR monster, Michael Gallup in Dallas. Out of those guys, though, kind of like you were saying, the most upside there is AJ Green. If he returns to any form similar to what he was prior to these injury-riddled seasons, and last year we are still not certain if he was hurt the whole year or if he was just disinterested in returning. Who knows? Maybe he's reinvigorated this season.
I think it was they were terrible, and there was no reason to rush him back, and they wanted to make sure they got that number 1 pick, which they did, and they got Joe Burrow. So I think it was a combination of him not really wanting to come back and the team saying, you know what, stay home. Let's get this number 1 pick. We'll bring you back fully healthy. That way you're not risking, a re-injury for a team that has 2 wins.
Yeah, he might be a guy that I find myself taking if I've locked up one of those elite, consistent wide receivers like the guy I just kind of talked down, Julio Jones. If I matched an AJ Green with a Julio Jones, and AJ Green, like I said, is any sort of similar to what he was in a bad team on a bad team who's going to be throwing the ball a lot, probably. I would love to be on the right end of that, and it's. With this whole coronavirus thing and no practice, not being able to develop rapport with Joe Burrow, all that, I mean, that's definitely going to be an issue. But the rookie is going to be leaning on guys like Green and Tyler Boyd. And the fact that they really don't have a tight end out there trying to catch passes. And the other option is John Ross, who I'll never like that guy. I like AJ Green, especially for that price, wide receiver 30.
Right. And I like him if I start like Adam Thielen, Calvin Ridley. Like if I start with that bona fide safety and I can take a wide receiver 3 who has upside, especially if I don't have to start 3 wide receivers every week. Like I love that potential upside and I would definitely be interested in him. But there is a lot of question marks. So you really have to be willing to like not only have him boom for your team, but there's a potential that he does little to nothing for you, misses a lot of time, or is just kind of average and really underwhelms at that 6th round price tag. So, it really depends. But like you mentioned, like Terry McLaurin's in a similar range, Hollywood Brown's in a similar range, like AJ Green or Stephon Diggs. I think I'd pick AJ Green in that scenario.
Yeah, I'm taking AJ Green in that scenario just based on the fact that Stephon Diggs, as good as he is, he's in, like I've said before, a run-first offense with both John Brown and little Cole Beasley out there on the outside fighting for the limited targets that Buffalo already has.
Yeah. Yeah, and if he falls into the Michael Gallup, Deontay Johnson, Julian Edelman, Will Fuller range, like I'm taking AJ Green in that scenario all day long. So it really depends for me. Like if I can get him into that kind of top 35 receiver range, I like him much better than if he's kind of in that 27 to 30. Although there is one other option that I like better, who we're going to discuss soon because he comes pretty quickly after AJ Green, and I would take him over AJ Green 10 times out of 10. Anything on Cincinnati before we head down to Houston?
I've talked them up. I talked Joe Mixon up multiple times months ago. The reason why I like AJ Green is just I think that this offense showed signs of life at the end of last year. And Joe Mixon, if he's involved and if he's dedicated to the team too, he shows that he's an elite talent back there. And I think with Burrow, we're going to see them sling the ball, and they could be a surprise offense. Not a good team, but a surprise offense this year.
Yeah, and if, we've kind of talked about this before, but if we're excited about Joe Mixon as a first-round pick, if we think AJ Green and Tyler Boyd can return value. If we think this offense will be better, Joe Burrow is a guy that you should be drafting late and hoping he can be your QB1. And if he's terrible or the offense doesn't click like we expect it to, you cut him and you go to the waiver wire and pick up somebody else, and you roll with a veteran and play the matchup game. But if you want a guy with upside at the quarterback position, I think Joe Burrow makes a ton of sense.
Yep.
But let's go to Houston. Let's talk about a receiver that I've never been a huge fan of, not because of talent, but just because of draft day price. But I found myself being a Brandon Cooks fan this offseason, and I'm just going to lean into it because I love me some Brandon Cooks this year. I think people are sleeping on him. I think the ADP is crazy. Let me just hit you with some numbers really quick, because I'm looking at Brandon Cooks, a guy who is coming off of 4 straight seasons of 80 plus targets or 80 plus receptions, 1,200 yards, big time numbers, top 10, top 15 type numbers, and he's going as wide receiver 35. What? I know the concussions are there and any time, but concussions could hit a lot of players and make them miss a lot of time. So I'll take that value all day long, especially because as my wide receiver 35 or 40, he's going to be my 3rd wide receiver at best, probably my 4th. And so I have all that upside potential with all the risk minimized.
Yeah, as you know, he has the boom ability to be a wide receiver 1, wide receiver 2 on a weekly basis. And referring to his concussions, he's had a lot of concussions. But prior to last year, he played 4 consecutive seasons where he played in all 16 games. So I mean, we're questioning a guy's durability who he's only had 2 years, his rookie season and last year, where he missed time, after coming off of, like you said, 4 straight 1,000-yard seasons and playing every single game. Jumping into an offense where DeAndre Hopkins is vacating 150 plus targets.
Yep.
And in a wide receiver room with Will Fuller and Kenny Stills and Kiki Kute, who can't stay on the field, this guy, I think he's my favorite potential boom this year in fantasy drafts, and I will be targeting him in pretty much every single redraft league that I'm in.
100%. As you mentioned, 156 targets vacated. 150 of those are DeAndre Hopkins. If Cooks gets 80% of that, you're looking at 80 plus catches, 1,200 yards, and 7 touchdowns based upon his rates. That feels very formidable. Obviously, David Johnson's there. I think he gets involved in the passing game, so maybe he cuts into a little bit of that. Maybe 8 games of Will Fuller, but I mean. I don't know what I'm missing here. And if you are one of those owners that loves to start heavy with those running backs and get, 3 or 4 in your first 4 or 5 rounds, Brandon Cooks is a potential wide receiver 1 that's coming in the 6th, 7th, 8th round. You can draft him. You could go 4 straight running backs, grab a receiver or a quarterback in round 6 or round 5 rather, and then still draft Cooks in round 6 ahead of ADP. Sure, you get him and still pay you off 10 times that with a top 10, top 15 type season.
Yeah, and to me, I just looked it up real quick. To think that Will Fuller is going ahead of Brandon Cooks based on a lot of people's belief that he has concussion issues, when Will Fuller has yet to play more than 14 games in a season with only 1 surpassing 11.
Yeah.
How are these people missing out on this? Will Fuller just cannot stay healthy.
It's really funny to me. There's a couple players that it's 1 season or a handful of games, and you talk yourself into this narrative, and then you're just constantly going back to it. Guys, Josh Gordon is never going to happen.
No.
Antonio Brown is not he unretired today. Oh my God!
Nobody is gonna sign
Nobody
that
wants
guy.
you. Go away. And now Will Fuller, I don't get it. I get it. And if Brandon Cooks plays 8 games and gets another concussion and goes away, you still got a wide receiver 1 for 8 games, and then you work the waiver wire, and we'll be here to help you with that all year. I don't see a downside at wide receiver 36 in the 7th or 8th round. I just don't.
No.
The last one, I think, the last guy we're going to talk about, non-receiver, which for us is wild, but here we are, is Raheem Mostert. It's been truly a wild ride for him. Was incredible in the playoff run, obviously took over in the backfield last year going into the Super Bowl. Entered early drafts as kind of a 5th, 6th, 7th round draft pick, a guy that was interesting as a RB 20 something, going as close to RB 3s, which I thought was a pretty fair price. And then the hype train got rolling, and he was pushed up like crazy, and was going as early as the 3rd round in a lot of drafts. I was actually looking at some ADP, and it's funny because March ADP had him in like the 6th round, and then May ADP had him up into like the 3rd or 4th. And then he requests a trade, and then now everybody's off the bandwagon again, and he's falling back into the 6th round. I feel like at a 3rd or 4th round price tag, there's no way in the world I'm going to draft him. And being in the Northern California area, playing in leagues with Niner fans, I'm probably not going to have any shares.
No.
But if I can get him in the 6th round, we talk about this offense a lot, and we always want to target the later options if we can. But that being said, if I can get him in the 6th round in a run-heavy approach, in an offense that is going to need to lean on that position with dynamic blockers like George Kittle and Kyle Juszczyk, I'm going to have a really hard time, especially, as someone who starts receiver heavy. If I go four receivers or 5 receivers or 4 receivers and a tight end or something, like, he's going to be the perfect option just sitting on a platter for me in round 5 or 6, and I'm going to gobble that up all day long.
This is going to surprise some people, as you and I often agree on things, but I will probably not be drafting Raheem Mostert. I'll be waiting the later rounds to take a Tevin Coleman or a Jerick McKinnon. For all the Mostert love that we saw last year, I know he picked it up the last 5 games of the year leading into the playoffs where he became the lead dog. I think a lot of that had to do with the fact that Tevin Coleman missed a lot of time and kind of injury. He got Wally pipped in a way. He worked his way out of the rotation because of injuries, not necessarily based on his playing. And Jerick McKinnon was absent, so now you add McKinnon back to the mix. Tevin Coleman's going to be healthy. Even in the times that Mostert took the lead back role, only once did he see more than 14 carries, and that was a 19 carry, 146-yard day against Baltimore. But he only passed 100 yards once. He wasn't really involved in the passing game. I know they don't pass to the running backs, but I know they're extremely run heavy in San Francisco. But for me to take him as my RB2, I would have to make sure that I was going to also acquire another guy with similar upside as, say, a J.K. Dobbins or a Mark Ingram in a rotation style run backfield like in Baltimore.
Yeah, no, and I think that's fair. And as I mentioned, we always want to get the later guy. Like Tevin Coleman was the guy that was going way too early last year. And if you drafted him, you were disappointed. That being said, his ADP has kind of adjusted to meet Mostert. So he was in March, he was 133 while everyone was on the Mostert hype train. Now he's inside the top 100. I'm going to be very curious to keep an eye over the next few weeks to see how their ADPs shift and how close they get. If, let's say, they're both 7th or 8th round picks and they're both sitting there, is it just to skip and go to McKinnon or find value elsewhere? Or if you had to choose one and that you're in the 8th round, you need a running back, they're both sitting there, who are you taking?
I'm probably still going to ride the Tevin Coleman train just based on his, him having experience with Kyle Shanahan.
Yeah.
And, it's one of those situations where I will probably try to avoid at all costs. maybe taking McKinnon as like a fourth option at the running back position. But yeah, it's not something that excites me.
Yeah, no, I totally get it. Like, but you know, in that range, there's not former teammate Matt. Let's see, I'm gonna look in like Damian Williams, J.K. Dobbins, Ronald Jones. I think we're taking all three of those guys over a Niners running back, aren't we?
Oh, I'm definitely taking Rojo.
We'll talk about it. All right, Brian, this was a lot of fun. If you enjoyed this episode, make sure you mash that thumbs up, hit the subscribe. Let us know what you're doing with these players. Are you not drafting any of them? Are you drafting any of them? Do you have another player that you think you're really not sure what to do with at their ADP? Let us know in the comments. We're always down to chat. You can also hit us up on our personal Twitters. As you can see there, at Greasy Rules 14, at Notorious KRO, at FPAOP on Twitter. We are on Instagram at I'll put it in the show notes. I forget what the link is. But if you're on Instagram, throw us a follow there. Just look up Angle of Pursuit. You'll probably find us. If you're into NASCAR and the sports betting, we're here every week previewing the races. We'll be here to talk some more fantasy football. Like I said, we're talking Zero RP next. We're here to help you get ready for a fantasy season and hopefully take home that fantasy championship. But for Brian Twining, I'm Kyle Robert, and we'll talk to you guys next time.